Welcome. My name is Judea. I'm a clairvoyant medium, spiritual guide, and teacher. Throughout my life, I've encountered beings and had visions that revealed profound insights. Here, I share the stories and lessons that returned with me. May they awaken wonder, curiosity, or validate your own perceptions of the magical, multidimensional reality we live in. I am a vision keeper, and this is my journey between worlds. Let me bring you back to the year 2006. I was 25 years old, and I found myself on the island of Kauai, not by choice, but through the intervention of a friend, after my life had collapsed entirely and I had reached rock bottom. My reality had just shattered. I had lost everything I owned. I had no money, barely a change of clothes, and I was in the midst of a complete mental, emotional, and spiritual breakdown. By that time, I was already living with a wide open mediumship and clairvoyance, though I didn't have the language to understand or name it. I only knew that I was perceiving a reality radically different from everyone else around me. 6 years earlier, I had undergone a profound spiritual awakening, but I had no teachers, no guides, or mentors to help me make sense of what was unfolding. I could see spirits, energies, and auras. I was hearing, feeling, and witnessing an overwhelming amount of phenomenon. I lived in constant fear that I was mentally ill, a fear I worked hard to conceal, even as these experiences deeply shaped and disrupted how I lived my life. The year before everything fell apart, I made the decision to engage more fully with my extrasensory perceptions. I began listening to the beings that approached me, without truly knowing whether they had my well-being at heart. I trusted naively, I was too open, too unguarded, and that openness led me down a path that ultimately shattered my world. The trauma that followed was so severe that during that period of my life, I was undeniably suicidal. It was only through the grace and intervention of kind people around me that I did not take my life. I couldn't bear what I was seeing and hearing. I no longer trusted any of it. I tried desperately to silence the noise, to shut it all down, but it never went away. In those days, I spent most of my time just trying to ignore it, resisting it, and fighting off whatever was trying to grab my attention. A friend at the time knew what I had just been through, and without warning, she bought me a plane ticket to Kauai, leaving the very same day. I reluctantly went out of guilt more than anything else. I knew she had very little herself, and this gesture was enormous. I also had nowhere else to go. I had so much resistance. I had never been to Kauai, and the idea of being stranded on an island in the middle of the ocean felt like the worst possible place to try to piece my life back together. But still I went. When I arrived, I spent the first several weeks curled up in a ball, licking my wounds, sinking into self-pity and depression. Every day was a struggle to exist. I didn't even pray. After what I'd been through, I no longer believed in God, something I had once poured immense faith into the years before. I felt betrayed, abandoned, and cursed by the world itself. Eventually, I managed to gather enough strength to take a few jobs. I made a plan. Save money, get back to the mainland, and start over. I clung to that plan with tunnel vision. I kept to myself, limited my socializing, and barely explored the island beyond traveling to and from work. Kauai was not a place I wanted to know. It was simply a place I needed to escape. I eventually began to meet people, though I wouldn't call any of those initial connections real friendships at the time. I remained distant and guarded. I was a lost loner marking time, doing whatever I could to leave a place I never wanted to be, carrying a life I didn't yet know how to live. One evening, just as the sun was setting, a guy I had recently met called me and asked if I wanted to join him and some of his friends for a campout on the west side of the island. It was on a beach at the very end of the road, he said. At that point, I had never traveled beyond the east side of Kauai. The island is small, only about 30 miles across, and it would take no more than an hour and a half to get there. I felt an inner pull to go. I wanted to make friends, to feel some sense of normalcy again, and this seemed like a chance, maybe even a small adventure. He told me to take the main road that loops around the island all the way to the end, where he would meet me at the entrance to the road leading to the beach. Back then, the road was long and unkempt. You needed a lifted four-wheel drive truck to make it through, and he had one. We agreed to meet there so he could drive me the rest of the way in. When I arrived, I left my car behind and climbed into his truck. We began the slow trek down the road. It felt endless. He had to carefully navigate deep ruts, dips, and tears in the earth, inching forward in the dark. By the time we were nearing our destination, night had fully settled in, and I couldn't see where we were headed. We eventually arrived at a small cluster of pavilions near a stretch of sand dunes and low trees. The air was arid, the foliage dry and sparse. The west side of the island felt almost desert-like, a stark contrast to the lush tropical landscape I had grown used to on the east side. He briefly introduced me to his friends. There were a few dozen people gathered, sitting in camping chairs, grilling food, drinking, listening to music, laughing and enjoying themselves. Everyone seemed welcoming enough, but I arrived carrying a great deal of anxiety. I was somewhere unfamiliar, with someone I barely knew, stepping into an established friend group filled with strangers. It didn't help that I was still in the midst of a deep recovery from the events just months prior. Beyond the trees, I could see an open stretch of beach, and my unease began to deepen. I told the guy who had brought me there I was going to walk down the beach and that I needed to go alone. I reassured him not to worry, that I just needed a little time to myself, and promised I would come back. I knew myself well. It would take time for the nerves to settle. He understood, and I made my way toward the shore. When I broke through the tree line and the beach revealed itself in full, I was utterly stunned. I had never seen a beach like this. To my left, the sand stretched endlessly into the darkness. To my right, silhouetted mountains rose behind me, cascading towards the place where the beach finally met its end. The waves were enormous. They were crashing against the shore, loud and commanding, as though the ocean itself was speaking. But what captivated me most was the sky. Above me was a blanket of stars unlike anything I had ever known, vast, open, untouched by man-made lights. The Milky Way was vivid and alive, and a nearly full moon hung in the sky, luminous and otherworldly. Standing there alone in that immense nighttime landscape, I felt impossibly small. I walked far enough down the beach to disappear into the darkness, putting distance between myself and the gathering at the pavilions. There was hardly anyone out there. Because the beach was difficult to reach in those days, it remained largely untouched. With every step, my anxiety deepened. My body began to tremble, though the night air was warm. There was no physical reason for it. I squatted down in the sand, facing the ocean, trying to settle myself. Then, without warning, a spirit appeared before me. I had seen spirits many times before, but this was different. What stood in front of me was a full-bodied apparition. In previous encounters, the spirits I perceived were translucent, partially formed or fleeting. This one was not. Before me stood a young man, roughly my age, fully manifested from head to toe. He had wavy hair and wore simple clothes, jeans and a t-shirt. He stood only a few feet away. He emerged from the darkness made of muted, washed-out light, illuminated just enough that I couldn't see through him. There was no doubt in my mind what he was. He was unmistakably not physical, yet unmistakably present. His form was composed of energy, his aura subtly distorting the space around him. What I felt from him was immediate and heavy. He carried a profound sadness, deprived of life, hollowed out, and sunken inward. There was a sullen weariness about him, a deep exhaustion that was palpable. Alarmed, I stood up quickly and walked further down the beach, trying to convince myself I had not just seen what I thought I saw. I told myself it wasn't real, that my mind was playing tricks on me. Then he appeared again. He stood before me, looking directly at me, clearly aware that I was aware of him. He seemed to inch closer. My panic escalated, and I moved away once more. And again, he followed. This time he reached out and touched me, almost tentatively, as if he were testing whether I was real, while I was still desperately trying to decide if he was. He proceeded to poke my shoulder. I felt it. It felt exactly like a physical finger pressing into my flesh. The sensation was undeniable, and fear surged through me deeper than before. I realized I could not simply walk away from this. In the darkness, I shouted at him, "I see you. Is that what you want? I see you. Now leave me alone." The words left my mouth before I could stop them. Immediately, I was furious with myself for engaging with what I still believed might be a delusion. I didn't want this to be real. I was still locked in a battle with the idea that I was mentally ill, that everything I was experiencing lived inside my own mind. But he didn't disappear. If anything, I sensed that acknowledgement was exactly what he wanted. It felt as though he needed to be seen, recognized, and affirmed. And so against my better judgment, I decided to give him what he seemed to be asking for, hoping that once he had it, he would finally go away. Then I heard him speak. His voice came from inside my head, telepathic, yet it carried weight and resonance as though I could hear the true tone of it in the air. "Help them see me," he said. "Those are my friends, and they can't see me like you can. I miss them." My heart dropped. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. I could feel his emotions as if they were my own, raw, aching, and genuine. I knew immediately that he was talking about the group of people I had just met. I couldn't help but feel compassion for him. Whatever defenses I had left began to fall away. Truthfully, I was just exhausted from fighting these experiences. Before my life fell apart, I would have been bewildered, maybe even amazed by an encounter like this, desperate to understand every detail of it. But now I barely cared it was happening. It felt like just another delusion I was being forced to entertain. I was so tired of these experiences, tired of questioning my sanity, tired of the constant games my reality seemed to play with me. And yet I felt I had no choice but to engage. Maybe he was a ghost. Maybe it was all in my head. Either way, I would have to see it through. In that moment, I reflected on all the other supposed spirits I had encountered over the years. So many times I had felt the desire to help them. There was always this heaviness around them, sadness, loneliness, a sense of being stuck, wandering without direction. In the past, I had tried to help them the only way I knew how, telling them to go to the light in some grand, dramatic voice I had borrowed from the movies. It never worked. They laughed at me, mocked me, or ran away. And truthfully, I didn't even know if there was a light, whether that idea was real, where it was, or how one would even guide someone there. Eventually, I stopped trying. But this evening was different. This young man felt no different from me. Alone, depressed, tired of being where he was. So I spoke to him as an equal, the same way I would speak to any living person standing in front of me in that moment. In my blunt, 25-year-old language, I said, "You're dead. Your friends can't see you or hear you, and I can't make them be able to. Being around them isn't helping anyone. You're carrying a lot of sadness, and it's really heavy." I told him that I heard there was this place that he could go, where time does not exist, a place that feels like going home. I think it's like returning to God. I told him that if he went there, it would feel like a blink of an eye before he would be reunited with everyone he loved. That's what I had heard, and that's what a part of me believed, as imperfect as my understanding was. "You need to go home," I told him, "back to God." As soon as I finished speaking, I saw the expression on his face change. It was subtle but unmistakable. Something in what I had said had landed. I watched the moment it clicked for him. The instant understanding took hold. Then right before my eyes, he began to change. His form condensed, shrinking inward until he became an orb of light. It flickered softly in a display of pastel rainbow colors, rising upward, growing smaller and fainter as it moved towards the sky, until it disappeared completely. In that moment, a clear knowing came over me. It finally worked. I had helped him cross over. Something that had felt so difficult and unreachable in the past suddenly revealed itself as so simple. There was no grand ritual required, no dramatic commands, just honesty, just speaking to them plainly, as one being to another, reasoning with them, helping them understand their situation so they could choose to move on. What happened on his side, I don't know, but I knew without a doubt that he had crossed over. A quiet sense of triumph washed over me. For a brief moment, my anxiety fell away. I felt something inside me rise up and cheer, as if my deeper self were speaking directly to me. "You did it." Before I could fully enjoy my celebration, another spirit appeared, and then another, and then another. Soon, 3 more fully embodied apparitions stood before me. Like the young man who had just disappeared, they were all men. Each looked of a different race and age. They stared at me intently, as if studying me, trying to understand what I was. Their hands reached out towards me, testing the space between us. They were so fully manifested that I couldn't see through them at all. They formed a barrier between me and the ocean. What I felt from these three was heavy, dark, laced with hostility. There was an aggression to them that made my body immediately register danger. I no longer felt safe. I stood up and moved further down the beach, again trying to convince myself that none of this was real. Again, just as before, they followed. One of them felt especially threatening, as though he might want to harm me. My body began to fold inward. I started to shake, curling into myself, fear overtaking any attempt at reason. Panic flooded my thoughts as I tried desperately to figure out what to do. Then suddenly something bumped into the back of me. The impact knocked me forward. I whipped my head around to see what had hit me, and did not expect to see what I did. Behind me stood another spirit. He was a tall, thin Caucasian man wearing glasses. I could hear his voice with startling clarity. "What the hell are you doing here?" he said sharply. "Get out of my way," he yelled at me aggressively. He shoved past me, stomping forward, as though he hadn't realized I was sitting there at all, nearly tripping over me as he was walking to wherever he was going. I was stunned. He felt physical, solid. It might as well have been a living person who had collided with me. My panic surged violently. My body began to shake uncontrollably. Oh no, I thought. I'm in some kind of portal. This is where all the bad spirits go. I need to run. I need to hide. I jumped to my feet and turned towards the mountains rising behind the beach, wanting to dart towards the trees. But what I saw there completely paralyzed me. I realized I was not alone on the beach. In fact, I was far from it. It was full of spirits. As far as I could see in either direction along the shoreline, there were crowds of them, rows and rows of heads so fully embodied that I could barely see the sand beneath or beyond them. The beach itself seemed swallowed by their presence. When I looked towards the mountains, I saw something even more unsettling. Between two high crevices near their peaks, there appeared to be a steady procession, a parade of spirits walking down towards the sand directly where I stood. I could see them emerging from the mountains, descending, arriving at the shoreline near me, and then continuing out over the ocean towards the far end of the mountain range where the beach finally disappeared. There, at the horizon, they seemed to vanish. The stretch of beach where I stood felt chaotic. Though nearly all of them were moving in the same general direction, from some unseen point A to point B, many wandered erratically. They crossed paths, doubled back, drifted sideways along the shore, confused and unsettled, as if trying to find their way, somewhere. My body froze in pure shock. I shook uncontrollably from head to toe. I was completely engulfed by them. There was no clear path to escape, nowhere to hide. Terror had fully set in. I had never witnessed anything even remotely like this before. I was convinced I had stumbled into some kind of hell, a place where lost and burdened spirits gathered. Every one of them felt unbearably heavy, as though they were carrying the full weight of their lives on their backs. I could feel their suffering, their anguish, their frustration, grievances, disappointments. I felt their selfishness, their judgments, their unresolved anger, and even got glimpses of their bad deeds. They were not at peace. They were upset, disgruntled, unsettled, moving without relief or rest. The ones who passed closest to me overwhelmed my senses. I could feel their emotional baggage as if it were my own. I could tell how many of them had died, some from sickness, some from physical trauma, some from old age, because I could see the orc scars of their passing still clinging to them. I could see and feel everything, and it was all so heavy. They appeared sunken in, deprived of life, like the Walking Dead you see in movies. Their faces were blank, eyes staring forward. They carried nothing but the clothes on their back. All of them moved in the same direction, yet with no conscious awareness of where they were going, or seemingly aware of the others that were walking with them. They seemed dazed, lost, trapped in motion without understanding. As I stood there shaking, I began to notice something strange happening around me. Though the spirits wandered aimlessly, those who passed directly near me would suddenly jolt into awareness. They appeared just as startled by my presence as I was by theirs. It was as though I registered to them only at close range, like an anomaly in their field of perception. Each one seemed surprised, almost confused, as if they hadn't noticed me until something about my presence interrupted their wandering and snapped them briefly awake. Some even asked me, "What are you doing here?" as though they sensed I definitely didn't belong. Several reached out to touch me, as though they themselves couldn't believe what they were seeing. I don't know what I looked like to them, but they all seemed perplexed, as though they weren't fully sure of what they were looking at as they observed me. Some of them stopped to investigate me further. One was a white man in his late 60s. He wore a cowboy hat and clothes that reminded me of a Wyoming rancher. Immediately, I felt the open land around him, wide fields, cattle, long days of hard labor. There was no doubt in my mind that this had been his life. I could feel his personality. He was abrasive, bitter, deeply arrogant. In life, he must have been domineering and unaccommodating, difficult to be around. I knew he had died suddenly, either from a heart attack or a stroke. His body had been pushed hard for decades, driven by relentless work and an attitude shaped by constant stress. He paused only briefly, long enough for me to receive all of this, and then he moved on. Another spirit approached, a young Asian man in his early 20s. His energy was obnoxious and full of attitude. He was sassy, sarcastic, flamboyant, and unapologetically himself. I knew immediately that he was gay, and he had lived fast and without restraint. He partied hard during his short life and had died from a drug overdose. Then I saw another man making his way towards me more slowly. His form flickered strangely. One moment he appeared whole, and the next his body flashed open, flesh torn, his left arm missing entirely. The image shifted back and forth, as if his awareness couldn't stabilize. It was clear he had died in a violent accident. He felt disoriented, still trying to comprehend what had happened to him, perhaps catching fragmented glimpses of his own death as he moved forward. Another man passed by, heavy-set, lethargic, unkempt. There was a deep neglect in his energy, a complete lack of care for himself. As he observed me, I understood that he had wasted much of his life through apathy and excess. Most of his days had been spent in front of a television, overindulging in junk food, avoiding effort, until his body finally gave out. Each of them revealed their story instantly, without words, and after that brief moment of recognition, they drifted back into the current and continued on their way. Then, in the midst of that chaos, something peculiar happened. A few yards in front of me, as if standing in a pocket of calm within the crowd, I saw an African family. There was a woman holding a small child, a man beside her, clearly her husband, and an older child, perhaps 14 years old. I knew they were from Africa by their clothing. The woman's head was wrapped in a bold, tribal-patterned fabric, and the clothes they wore looked as though they came from a small village somewhere from that part of the world. They stood out immediately, not just because they had stopped, but because they were together, and everyone else was walking alone. And unlike the others, they were all smiling at me. There was a kindness to them, a peace. I felt an overwhelming sense that they were genuinely happy to see me. Love radiated from their presence. As they began to walk towards me, their movements were gentle and calm. Surrounded by so much heaviness and despair, I found myself clinging to their energy. They were the first thing I had seen in what felt like a long time that didn't feel dark or threatening. They must be here to help me, I thought. As they approached, I eagerly asked if they were some kind of spirit guide sent to protect me. Then the smell came. Smoke. Burning. A sense of hot, choking air around them. Just like with the man I had seen earlier, flashes began to appear upon them. Charred clothing, burned skin, brief images flickering in and out. I understood instantly. This was a family who had died together in a fire. As the realization came, the woman smiled at me and let out a soft chuckle, as though the answer should have been obvious. "We are here walking like everyone else," she said. I could feel that they were good people. They had lived with very little. Their lives had been marked by hard work and struggle, by effort that yielded few rewards, and yet beneath all of that, I could feel their goodness. Kind, humble souls who carried love in their lives despite their hardships. It was through them that my perspective began to shift. I looked again at all of these spirits on the beach. I really looked with a calmer observance, no longer distracted by my fear. What I had first perceived as a mass of negative male spirits trapped in some hellish realm was not that at all. I began to see women as well. Some of these people were very old, some were only small children, and every age in between. I saw people of every race, from countless countries and cultures. I sensed different faiths, belief systems, and even sexual orientations. Some had been kind in life, and others cruel. There was no single moral category that defined them. They all walked side by side, where none of these attributes in life that define and separate us mattered anymore. The one thing that they all shared was energetic weight. They were heavy with the burdens of their lives, heavy with unresolved pain, identity, and memory, and all of them were still in a place of not fully realizing they had died, or not yet ready to let go of who they had been so that they can move on. In that profound moment of realization, a direct knowing came over me, clear and unquestionable. I understood that these spirits entered from that point on the mountain, carrying the full weight of their lives, worn like cloaks woven from experience, and one by one, all of them would eventually make their way out over the ocean, towards the place where I had seen them disappear. I knew without being shown, without being told, that whatever awaited them there would liberate them from the heaviness that they carried. All of them, without exception, without discrimination, every soul would receive that renewal. Upon realizing this, an immense wave of mourning and grief overtook me. Compassion flooded through me, deep, unconditional forgiveness for every soul that I saw. The relief that awaited them felt like the most beautiful gift imaginable, and I knew with certainty that they were all walking toward it. It was my first encounter of truly feeling the power of unconditional love. The grief I felt was overwhelming, maternal in its intensity. It was as though these souls were my own children, like a mother holding a lifeless infant in her arms, innocent, pure, lives marked by struggle and cut short by time. The sense of separation from the living world, from what had been known and loved, was so vast, I began to cry uncontrollably. Then, to my surprise, I heard the whales. Their wailing songs rose in the distance, something that shouldn't have been possible to hear from the shore, yet the air around me filled with their voices. A chorus surrounded me. In that moment, I realized how closely a whale's song resembles the sound of grief itself, long and aching. I fell to my knees, and bowing to the earth, I buried my face into my arms towards the ground. As I lay there, I felt my own pain rise to the surface, the burdens of my life, the weight of my choices. I reflected on the harm I had caused, the mistakes that I had made, and how desperately I longed for the same forgiveness these souls were about to receive. For the first time in months, I prayed. I prayed to God with everything I had left in me. I asked for forgiveness from the deepest place in my being, for every way I had hurt another, for every choice I made in fear, confusion, or pain. I was profoundly sorry, truly sorry. In that prayer, I accepted full accountability for my life. I saw clearly that the despair I had been living in was not something God had inflicted upon me. It was the result of my own choices. I had blamed and turned away from God out of pain, but I had orchestrated the path that brought me there. The realization was humbling beyond words. I laid my head in the sand in full surrender, overwhelmed by grief, for all the souls and for myself. I don't know how long I was there. I may have even fallen asleep while crying. Eventually, I felt a tap on my shoulder and heard a voice ask, "Hey, are you okay?" It was the guy who had invited me out there. I lifted my head and looked out over the beach. It was empty. I sat up and scanned the shoreline. What only moments before had been a vast procession of spirits was now nothing more than an endless stretch of sand beneath a star-filled sky. There were no figures, no voices, and no movement in the distance, no sound of whales, no other presence but us. I sat there a bit stunned. Did I just dream all of that? I thought. It had felt so real, so vivid, that it was hard to accept how completely and suddenly it had vanished. As far as I could see in either direction, the beach was still. He seemed casual and unfazed. "The food's ready if you're hungry," he said. I stood up in a daze, brushing the sand from myself. "Okay," I replied, not knowing what else to say, at a loss for words, and began to walk back towards the pavilions with him, trying to process what had just happened. When we returned to the campsite, nothing had changed. Everyone was still there, laughing, talking, carrying on exactly as they had been when I left. I wasn't even sure how long I had been gone. It could have been minutes, though it felt like hours. I sat down and someone handed me a plate of food. I began to nibble on it just to regain a sense of myself. One of the local guys looked at me and asked, knowing that it was my first time there, "So, what do you think of the beach?" For a brief moment, I weighed the consequences of answering honestly. I was sure they would think I was crazy, that I would be seen as strange, that whatever chance I had at making friends would disappear. But the moment I opened my mouth, the words automatically poured out. I told them everything. As I spoke, the group fell completely silent. All eyes were on me. I had their full attention. When I finished, the weight of what I had said hit me all at once. I looked at them, suddenly aware of how unbelievable it must have sounded. "I'm sorry," I said. "You probably think I'm crazy." One of them looked at me and said, "No? Do you know where you are?" "No," I said. "This beach is called Polihale. It means house of the dead. The kahunas say that this is an exit point for souls when they leave this world and move into the afterlife." The moment those words reached me, something profound lifted from inside. A weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying dissolved instantly. It was as if a cage I had locked myself into, believing I was broken, delusional, disconnected from reality, simply opened and vanished. What I had seen wasn't just validated, it was known, honored, respected by the spiritual elders of this land exactly as it was revealed to me. It was the greatest validation I had ever received, and it came in the most unexpected, profound, and sacred way. From that moment on, everything in my spiritual life began to shift. The journey ahead was long, and there were many difficult lessons still to come. But that night renewed my unwavering faith in God, and forever changed my understanding of the spirit world. From that night forward, I understood that I had been given more than a lesson in how to help spirits cross over. I had been offered a rare glimpse into some of the actual process a soul moves through when leaving life on earth, the weight it carries, the confusion it endures, and the mercy that ultimately awaits it. In time, I learned something else. This group of friends had lost someone dear to them in a tragic accident just 6 months earlier. When I was eventually shown his photograph, there was no doubt in my mind. The first spirit who had come to me on the beach had been him. It felt like an honor that his presence had been the one to initiate my understanding, the doorway through which I would help countless other spirits find their way forward. Not long after, I also came to learn that the Dalai Lama had once visited Kauai and made a pilgrimage to Polihale, already knowing it to be one of the sacred portals on earth where souls cross into the afterlife. Hearing this only deepened what I had already come to know for myself. Over the years, I returned to that beach again and again, each visit revealing something new, beautiful, instructive, and profound. But these are experiences and stories for another time. It is no exaggeration to say that the presence of the portal at Polihale is one of the reasons I chose to remain on Kauai and why I still live here today. Polihale is also sometimes translated as House of the Bosom. When I came to understand this, it felt just as true. In that name lives the image of returning home, not to judgment or punishment, but to comfort, to the unconditional love of being held, the way a child is gathered into the bosom of its mother. Seen through that lens, what I witnessed on the beach makes even more sense. Souls arriving burdened by life, only to be received, softened, and released, not cast away, but gathered in. And once you've seen that, you never quite look at life or death the same way again. Over the course of several years, a song slowly came to me after my visits to Polihale. I came to think of it as the anthem of this profound portal. If there were a single piece of music that could hold the essence of what unfolds there, to me, this would be it. And so I'm going to play this for you now. Thank you for listening to this true account of one of the experiences that I had that shaped who I am and how I walk this path as a spiritual guide today. Blessings.
So many roads to travel, so many paths that I can roam. searching, just trying to find my way back home. I have done this all before, and I'll do it all again. This all before, and I'll do it all again. This blessed cloak I shoulder, this tapestry I made, my choices wove its colors. What's been done can never fade. And you clear it all away as I learn from what I do. I'll walk, and one day I'll see the others as they walk with me. All differences we have now set aside, and I know that we all deserve to have our different stories heard when we reach that final road that leads us home. Polihale, 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 I'm coming home. Polihale, 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 I'm coming home. I thank you for these lessons. I thank you for the trying times. I thank you for these blessings. I thank you for the guiding signs. I would do it all again if it lead me back to you. that we